Well, good morning. How are you guys? All right, we're there, kind of. I did youth ministry for 15 years. I used to ask that question, and people would be like, students were great. They were a ton of fun. One of the greatest ways to get students to ever follow instructions was to say, hey, who wants to pray? All students get real quiet. It's magic of student ministry. But hey, let me ask this question. How many of you guys were here 2 years ago when I was here? Okay, so a handful of you. All right, well, then I'm not going to change anything. We're just going to use the same thing. This works great. No, I'm just kidding. I want to say thank you guys, first and foremost, on behalf of AIM. Aaron alluded to a little bit to generosity and how that really makes a difference on the global front. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, but I just want to start by saying thank you. You guys are empowering ministry on the front lines around the world, and I hope today gives you a bit of a glimpse of what that looks like, what that means, because I know sometimes it's easy in a church setting that gets said, but sometimes it's lost on us. We don't necessarily know what that means or what's happening, so I hope today our time maybe stretches you a little bit, it challenges you a little bit, it expands your perspective on what is happening in our world, but also I want it to encourage you, because even just this past time of prayer that we've had, I think the reality is we're really discouraged in our world right now. It's tough to be positive. It's difficult, and I think at times we can easily just go like, man, everything is wrong, everything is messed up. And so I hope that through our time today, you can begin to get a little bit of a glimpse of what God is up to in the world around us, that you can see some hope in the midst of darkness, that you can find some light in the midst of the darkness. So that's my hope for our time today. But let me kind of back up and introduce myself. My name is Mark. Aaron and Joy and I got a chance to go to Belize almost 2 years ago and go down and check out our emerging work down there. I'm going to give you an update on that and just walk you through all those things. But we got a chance to really get to know each other, hang out, spend some time. But beyond that, just get to do ministry and life together. And so I'm grateful for them, their leadership. I'm grateful for you as a church, an opportunity to be here. I spent 20 years as a pastor prior to joining AIM staff. And so I got a chance to do ministry here in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area. Went to college here, have lived here most of my adult life. Got to spend 8 years in Las Vegas doing ministry. And when I was there, that was the opportunity that I had to meet AIM, Agape International Missions. Got to know them as a pastor, got a chance to go to Cambodia a handful of times and see the ministry firsthand, and fell deeply in love with an organization that was doing incredible work. And then about 4 years ago, I got the opportunity to join the staff. And so for the past 4 years, I've been able to serve on AIM staff, get to know our leadership and our leaders on the front lines, and I am humbled pretty much every single day by the people I get to work with. Because they do some very heroic things. And I hope that today I get a chance to share some of those stories with you guys and give you just a glimpse of what that looks like. Let me give you an overview of what AIM does. For many of you, AIM may be new to you. You may not understand what we do. And so I just want to give you a bit of the 5,000-foot view, and then some of these stories will illustrate more of the specifics as we go along. So at AIM, we do three main things. We're rescuing survivors out of sex trafficking and exploitative situations. And by that, I mean we're going in and doing an immense amount of investigative work, and then going in with local law enforcement, doing raids, arrests, rescues, brothel closures, all those types of things. The second part of what we do is we do restoration work. So how do we help somebody who's come out of one of those terrible, traumatic situations and walk through a healing process? So we have aftercare homes and transition homes that walk women and girls through that healing process. And a part of that process is also them learning a vocational trade. How do we help them launch sustainably back into their communities to be thriving members of their communities and no longer vulnerable to the predatory traffickers that once drew them in to this awful, awful situation? So out in your lobby, actually, you guys have the opportunity to actually purchase some things that these women are making in and through the employment center, where they're learning that trade, they're learning that skill, and through that, they're able to send products literally all around the world that tell a bigger story than just a product, bigger than just a t-shirt or a kimono or a piece of jewelry, is the story of freedom that's behind that. That's empowering a woman to sustainable freedom. So if you're wondering what those things are out there, that's what that is. That's part of the story I'll tell you today. But that's one of the elements of part of the restoration process of these women. And then the third thing we do is transformation. So the idea is, how do you go upstream from the problem into red light districts and begin to attack it before it ever starts? And so I'll tell you a little bit about what that looks like. So those are the three things that we do, the three areas that we work in. But again, let me give you our mission statement. It's this. AIM is freeing hearts, lives, and communities from the evil of sex trafficking in Jesus' name and Jesus' way. And by what I mean by that in Jesus' name and Jesus' way is the gospel is at the center of everything that we do. The stories I'll share with you today have nothing to do with us as humans, but everything to do with God's miraculous power in the lives of survivors. And Jesus' way means up close, personal, incarnational, living with, moving into these places. When I'm talking about working in red light districts, I'm not talking about like launching in and then going back home. I'm saying moving in, setting up shop, and doing life. That's what we're talking about. But let me give you a little of a glimpse of the picture of what I'm talking about as far as the issue. Now, this is the part I think sometimes that we get lost in because these numbers are huge, but I think it lays the foundation of where we need to go today. Because human trafficking on a whole is a very large issue. And sometimes we often think about this as an issue that's happening across the globe somewhere else. It's not happening here. Well, the reality is it's happening here. It's a very real problem in Cincinnati. It's a very significant problem in the state of Ohio. On a global scale, over 49 million people are currently living in modern-day slavery right now, which is more than ever in history. And most people turn a blind eye to it. And I'm not going to throw guilt at anybody. I think this is just the reality. We don't want to acknowledge that this is a problem. It makes us uncomfortable. Let me break this down a little bit more. 1 in 4 currently enslaved are children. Children. 6.3 million people are being trafficked for sex right now. 78% are women and girls. This is a very real problem with significant numbers, and these are real people. But I also know this: victory is possible. Now, I hope today through our conversation you'll begin to see what I mean by this, but I believe this wholeheartedly, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have joined AIM's team. But I believe wholeheartedly that victory is possible. And let me give you this little caveat. If we do our job as the church, we can undo this evil. Well, let me start with our story. So a little over 15 years ago, AIM started into the community of Swaipak, which at the time Swaipak was known as one of the most depraved red light districts in all of Cambodia, if not all of Southeast Asia. People would travel from all around the world to this one single street in this community because of their availability to sell children. And so streets lined with brothels. And AIM was not immediately welcome there. As you can imagine, we were there to shut down their livelihood, their businesses, and so they were very resistant to our presence. One of our very first landlords denied us access to water and electricity for the first 6 months. They did not want us there. Our team was faced with intense resistance, hostility, threats, intimidation. They didn't want us there. A powerful story from one of our team members named Kunti. I want to show that to you today because it gives you a glimpse of what we're talking about because he grew up there. This is his story, so I want you to check out this video.
Swaipak was the red light district, the darkest village in Cambodia. It was the place to go to if you are looking for youngest girls. Pimps would swarm every foreign man that come into town. And I have seen young girls being sold to pedophiles. But when AIM came, our staff member would reach out to our local authorities and the shadow of darkness began to diminish. Now I could see Swaipak is the garden of hope, of love, of care to the kids in the community. I came to AIM through a friend of mine sharing the gospel with me. The Kids Club teacher was teaching kids about God's creation. That moment was eye-opening for me. Right after Kids Club time, I went to the pastor and asked, what do I need to do to become a Christian? because of wanting to know more about the real Creator, because I was looking for answers for years. 6 months later, I was baptized, and now here I am, serving AIM in Swipe Park. My life has been transformed, but not just me. Other AIM staff experience the same transformation. One of my students, she is now become our teacher at AIM School. She is now teaching and passing on the legacy, what God has done in her life through AIM to the next generation. That young girl is now the teachers that is passing on the transformation. I have seen lives transform. I have seen hearts heal, and I have seen my community transform. But there is more to come. So join us as we see more rescues, more life change, more hearts healed, and more community transformed. If it can be done in Swipe Park, it can be done anywhere.
I love what he said there. If it can be done in Swipe Park, it can be done anywhere. I wish I could take you to the streets of Swipe Park years ago compared to the streets today. The streets today are filled with the sounds of kids laughing and playing, rollerblading down the street. A drastic difference than what it was, but it's also a huge testimony to what God has done. Here's what we realized at AIM, that when we thought we were praying big prayers of faith, God was up to so much more. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. Our co-founders, Don and Bridget Brewster, launched out to do this in 2005, and I'll get a little bit more of their story in a minute. But when they launched into Cambodia, they had this vision, and Bridget began to pray that God would send them 24 girls that they could serve at the very first AIM restoration home. But God has turned that into over 1,000 girls who have not only found a home, but have found love, stability, and a personal relationship with Jesus. And talking with our CEO, Clay, here recently, he was sharing a story. He says, I remember praying a prayer very early in my time in Cambodia, back in the early 2000s, and he said this. I said, I prayed that God would use my life to rescue 16 girls. And I thought that was a very big prayer. Just recently, we celebrated over 1,700 rescues. And what we've seen in Cambodia is nothing short of miraculous. We've seen the creation and success of a holistic model for fighting sex trafficking and healing survivors. It's having a national impact in Jesus' name and Jesus' way. And as we continue to focus on the work we're doing and further the reach we currently have, we feel led to expand our community transformation efforts beyond Swipe Park, asking the question of where would you send us next, God? Because the reality is, we know this is not us and what we're doing. It's simply following in step with what God is orchestrating. Because if it can be done in Swipe Park, it can be done anywhere. It's how do you take the fight to the source? And so we're actively pursuing that next red light district. Where is it? What would you have us do there? And so our team is actually beginning to work into a new community in Cambodia. Here's what I know. God is working on hearts. His kingdom is expanding in dark and broken places. Jesus is the center of our story name. And we're believing that God's global movement, not ours, is on the move. And we're simply trying to follow along with what God is calling us to do. Because here's what we've seen. We've seen when you walk into dark places, sometimes it feels extremely hopeless. When we first stepped into Swipe Park, it was one of those moments where you go like, I don't know if anything can ever change here because this is a really dark and depraved place. A lot of bad things take place in that community. It would have been easy to basically just said, nah, it's not worth it. It's really hard. It's too difficult. It's not worth it. But God. We just continue to take steps of faith and believe that God could do a miracle. And today I can stand here and say that God did that miracle. Instead of brothels, there's now a thriving church. Instead of kids being exploited, there's a school that is serving kids and raising up a whole new generation for a positive future. We have an employment center employing survivors of trafficking and giving them a great future. At AIM, we have hope. We have hope. The world around us may look grim and dark and hopeless, but we have hope. Why? Because if God can transform Swipak, he can transform anywhere. We have had a front row seat to watch God work at transforming lives and ultimately a community, one life at a time. We've seen survivors, girls who have come into our programs, who have now gone on to become wives and moms, pursuing careers. We have one that has become nationally famous as a baker in the country of Cambodia. We have two that have joined our SWAT team as investigators. Some have gone on to plant churches. Why? Because they've experienced the transformational love of Christ. And our confidence comes from what we've seen God do in the past. There's a story out of Scripture that I want to share with you guys today because it's been something that's spoken pretty loudly to us as an organization, as a staff, as a team. The story of Joshua and Caleb, where Moses sends out the 12 spies to scout out the promised land. And there's a crazy interaction that plays out there in Numbers 13 and 14. A little bit of context. The Israelites have just recently been freed out of Egypt, and they're moving towards the promised land that God has set before them. And they reach the edge, and their task at hand is, let's go scout the promised land. What's it going to take this land? And let's figure out a game plan to do so. So Moses sends out the 12 spies to survey the land. He says this in Numbers 13, verse 17. It says, when Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or is it bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they walled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile? Is it poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was a season for the first ripe grapes. And when they returned, they brought all of these reports of how amazing the land was. They even brought back the fruits of the land to show the people. And they recounted what they saw. And then they began to start spreading this message of, there's no way we can defeat the people who live there. They're huge. We look like grasshoppers in their eyes. All of these kinds of reports began to filter through the people from these spies that just got sent out. Caleb, one of the 12 spies sent to scout, he addressed the people in verse 30. It says, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and says, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And all of a sudden, the 10 guys jumped all over what Caleb said, and they struck fear into the people because they kept saying, there's no way we can do it. There's no way. It's not possible. And I think if I had basically gotten up here today and I had just started out and told you 49 million people are living in slavery right now, have a great Sunday, a couple things would have happened. You would go, that's the worst sermon I've ever heard. You would say, that's the most discouraging thing I've ever experienced. And you'd probably feel like those 10 spies and go, there's no way we can ever make a difference in this. It's too big. It's too difficult. It's too hard. There's no way. I think in life, we often get in scenarios like that, or maybe we're surrounded with people like that we find our opportunity to step into a situation that may provide a unique opportunity, and we listen to the naysayers instead of what God is doing. And sometimes we forget what God has done. Because what was happening in this moment was these people were rebelling. Now, remember, or maybe this is new to you, these people had experienced the miraculous work of God up close, firsthand, just before this. They had just been freed from Egypt by the 12 plagues, or 10 plagues. They had just walked through the Red Sea. They've been led by a pillar of fire at night, a cloud by day. They've had manna fall from heaven. And yet they're on the cusp of going into the promised land. And now all of a sudden it's like they forgot that God had ever done any of those things in their midst. Joshua gets up in Numbers 14, verse 7, and this is what he says. He says, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Joshua and Caleb's confidence came from remembering what God had done in their midst. They had seen it firsthand. And I think sometimes we read that and we're going, man, it would be so easy to have faith like that, because seeing God's miraculous, seeing what God had done. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I struggle, even though I know and I've experienced the things that God has done up close. Sometimes I get into situations where it's calling on my faith and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if God can do that. All the while, the inner conflict is bouncing around going, wait a second, I've seen God do it before. Shouldn't that reassure me that God can do it again? And this is the battle that Joshua and Caleb were trying to fight, is like he's trying to instill in the people. He's done it before. He'll do it again. This is our promised land. This is what God has called us to. And therefore, these guys had full reliance on what God had done. And that informed them about what God would do. The Ames story is one of utter reliance. The things we've witnessed over the years have not been a result of things that we have orchestrated. It started off with our co-founders, Don and Bridget. I told you a little bit about them just a few minutes ago, but when they started out, this wasn't their background. Don was a pastor in California. In the early days, they had formalized a plan, and they had taken it to their church thinking, we'll present it at our church, and someone will want to take the plan and go and enact it. Now, Don and Bridget were in the early 50s when they started AIM. So they take it to their church, and guess what? Nobody stepped up. So they kept taking step after step after step. They even got to one meeting with another NGO leader in Cambodia who walked through a checklist of things of like, hey, are you this? Do you have this qualification? Do you have this background? And they were like, no, no, no. And he told them, it would be better for you just to stay home and send money. But they knew what God was calling them to do, and they just kept taking step after step after step. So when everything was telling them to stop and all the naysayers were telling them to turn around, God stepped in. He built the very first staff, and he filled the first restoration home. Remember, I told you Bridget had prayed for 24 girls to be served by the new AIM restoration staff, or home. And originally that was like a 4-year plan. 3 months into opening the first restoration home, it was full with 24 girls. I remember hearing Don answer a question one time. Somebody asked, hey, how did you hire your first staff? His response was, I don't know. I was like, what? So I just listened, because I'm like, I don't get, how can you answer the question like that? It happened. How? He said, people would show up at our front gate and they would hand their resumes through the gate. And they were exactly the kind of people we were looking for. The therapist, the house moms, the social workers, the people with the qualifications, as they've often said, the people with the letters behind their names were showing up, wanting to be a part of what God was doing in their community. When AIM moved into Swaipak, it was unimaginable. And the odds were against us. No other organization had been successful in that community. The reports in those days would have sounded much like those 10 spies. There's no way this place can turn around. It's too evil. It's too much darkness. But God. He built a church. It was one of the very first things that we did in the community was just to plant the church. And through that, he raised up a pastor who would ultimately become a father to the fatherless. And there are many, many stories, if I had time, I would tell you about moments like that where he stepped in and began to bring families and kids into his very home and treat them like his own children. And the transformation ensued. In the early days of doing rescues in Cambodia, they were constantly being tipped off. We would show up and no one was there. We were faced with an uphill battle of corruption, and it was extremely disheartening. But God, he built a SWAT team. This year, they're celebrating 10 years of work. And they go in with local law enforcement, hand in hand with local government, and are beginning to rescue people. They're shutting down brothels, and they're giving freedom to people who are enslaved. Here's what I want you to have as a takeaway today is this. We've seen it before, which informs our confidence that he will do it again. Because I think in our world we need this reminder, because sometimes the days seem hopeless. Because we're inundated with information that would constantly remind us that the days are evil and the times are dark. But I want you to remember this, that we have seen it before, which informs our confidence that he'll do it again. God's not done. God's not stopping. He's not slowing down. God is working. I want to give you some very real ways in which I have seen this firsthand. And we have things we are celebrating as an organization, things that you and your generosity are helping to make happen. So let me encourage you for the next few moments with these very stories. The first one is this, and there's some pictures that accompany this. On June 5th, just last month, which this may not look like much to you, but this was a raid where 23 survivors were rescued in one night. 11 were minors, 4 arrests, and 3 brothels were closed in one operation. The next slide. June 10th, 5 days later, 14 survivors rescued, 5 were minors, 3 arrests, and 1 brothel closed. God is still moving. He is still active. People are still finding freedom. The next one. This is a really cool thing. 36 survivors were baptized in one day back in February. That doesn't happen because we had really good counseling. That happens because God's in the business of transforming lives, restoring hope and healing. We celebrated that. We were blown away at that. And I remember getting the news of this and I was like, wait, what? Are you kidding me? This is incredible. The next one. We're in the process of opening a new restoration home in the country of Cambodia. Because what we've seen is God is beginning to rescue more girls than we know what to do with. And in that process, God has then begun to answer the very problem we found is we need somewhere to provide restorative care for these girls. Well, there's many, like I said, there's many stories I would love to tell you, but for time's sake, trying to consolidate some of these, or we could stay here for a while. But the long and short of it is God provided the resources and God provided the location far faster than we could have imagined. In the whole time of setting goals, this is one of our goals for later this year. But God said, no, watch this. We just opened this up. We're able to provide 30 more beds for aftercare. The next slide is AIM Belize. God has been orchestrating this for a while now. Joy and Aaron got to go down and check this out with us. And currently right now, we're in the process of getting our license to open up the very first home for underage girls to receive aftercare in the country of Belize. And so we have teams that are coming down over the next few months to orchestrate projects to get us across the finish line so we can open these doors in January and provide aftercare. God is on the move. God is not slowing down. God is not hiding away. Some more things. We've launched a new SWAT team initiatives into rural communities. I'll explain a little bit of that in a second. We've seen 86 rescues already this year, with more to come. If I had more time, I would tell you about some of those that we know are probably going to come before too long. We've hosted teams in Belize that are constantly down there doing projects to push that work forward. We've seen families freed from the bondage of slavery in brick factories. And we have been humbled by seeing hundreds of donors give sacrificially to resource ministry on the front lines. And these are just some of the ways we've seen God move this year. That's just this year. That's not backing up over our almost 20 years history to tell you all the stories of the survivors that God has changed their lives, of the baptisms, of churches launched, of all the things. Right? Because the God of miracles is still in the business of doing the miraculous. The God of miracles is still in the business of doing the miraculous. And I think sometimes I'm guilty of forgetting this. Because I may not see it in my everyday life, but I am encouraged by the stories that I get from our team on the front lines. And I will say this, it has been an extremely exciting time to get to be on staff at AIM. Because this is a moment in time where we feel like the wind is at our back and we're expanding outwards. I told you I'd tell you this. Our SWAT team is expanding to reach so that we can actually affect change in rural areas. Because in rural areas, things often go missed or unaddressed, and girls are not provided any services. We want to change that. We want to bring those services into those rural areas. And so we're expanding outwards. We're expanding our restoration capacity so we can provide more aftercare for more girls. And not only are we expanding in Cambodia, but we're expanding in Belize with the goal of opening a restoration home. And then all of a sudden, how to bring it online, how do we do rescue, and how do we do transformation work? How do we move into red light districts in the country of Belize? Fast forward down the future, we're also then beginning to pray about, God, where to next? Where to next? Because we follow a God who is constantly on the move. And so we're just asking him, where would you have us move next? Where would you have us look next? And so we're beginning to look outward. We're moving forward in Cambodia. Like I told you, we've begun to pursue a new red light community in Cambodia. So how do we move into these places and begin to do work that we can address the issues ahead of them from being trafficked and being exploited? Because we're committed to strike at the root of exploitation. And there are girls that need to be rescued and communities that need to be transformed. Right? We invite you to pray with us, serve with us, help propel this work forward. Your generosity is making a difference. I know that all this can seem overwhelming. I think some of you may have seen the movie Sound of Freedom this past summer. And I think sometimes we have this reaction, or even if I just left you with those statistics, I think our oftentimes default response is to self-eliminate. Well, I couldn't do anything. There's nothing I can do. Because maybe on the surface, you think the qualification is, well, somebody who has maybe a law enforcement background or military background could go in and do raids and arrests and rescues. Okay, fair enough. Or there's the therapy side of things, the restoration aftercare. You're like, well, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I don't have that. Fair enough. But every single one of us can do something. Something. Because I would say this was part of my own personal struggle, that when I went to Cambodia for the first time and I saw the things that I saw, experienced the things that I experienced, it totally flipped my world upside down. Completely shifted my perspective. And the wrestle I had when I got back home was like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? I'm just a pastor. I don't have any of these qualifications. So I found myself really just kind of going, I don't know. And it was a long journey to begin to figure out what that was, that somebody like me, who had seemingly no qualifications to do anything, can make a difference. The first thing I want to encourage you with is this: we can all erase vulnerabilities. We can all erase vulnerabilities. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean this: trafficking is a crime of opportunity. Traffickers will prey upon the most vulnerable in your community to try to draw them into a trafficking situation. The path of least resistance. How can I go over the weakest, the most unnoticed, maybe the forgotten, and capitalize on those types of people? That's what traffickers are doing. So our job as Christ followers is to address the vulnerabilities in our community. If we look around, we try to figure out who is most susceptible. When we sustainably elevate people up out of vulnerability, we are sparking transformation within the most at-risk populations. Let me give you an example of this. We're talking about foster care, mental and emotional health, broken homes and runaways, homelessness, food insecurity, addiction. These are all some of the most vulnerable population to be preyed upon by traffickers. Those are things that you and I can do something about. Reality is, your church has already got plans in place to do things like that. They already have local partnerships. Some of you have connections to local ministries and nonprofits that are addressing vulnerabilities like these. When you address those kind of vulnerabilities, you are cutting off trafficking before it can ever take root. That's something each one of us can do. What we learned in SWIPOC was there are 3 huge ways that tackle trafficking at its root core. And it was this. The first one is this: education. Education. We started a school in SWIPOC because those kids had no access to quality education. So we started a school. We saw a community begin to transform through education, raising up a new generation of leaders, empowering families. The second part of that was a local church. A local church taking root in a red light district. The way the local church came about, our CEO tells a story in the early days. Don and Bridget tasked him. He says, hey, go into SWIPOC. Here's a small budget. Go stop trafficking. He was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so they went in and they started a church. They took hold of an old brothel. They painted it canary yellow, and they painted a cross on the outside. And that was the birthplace of the local church in SWIPOC. And they simply went out and they met the tangible physical needs of the people in that community and just said, we're here to serve. And that local church is now over 200 people strong every single week, worshiping, praying, discipling, giving to global missions, doing incredible things, celebrating baptisms on a regular basis. And the third thing that we found over time, was men's outreach. The question is, how do you address the demand side of things? We found that men's outreach was the most effective way to go about that, and so we started a Muay Thai boxing gym that began to reach men, began to draw in men to come in because they wanted to learn about Muay Thai boxing. We used it as an avenue to create an opportunity for discipleship and mentorship. And through it, we've seen many, many men come to Christ, change their lives, and become outspoken for the gospel. And so we're taking that information and those learnings and that time-tested process, and we're going to apply it in new communities of how do we bring education? How do we elevate education? How do we launch and bolster local churches? And how do we begin to reach and transform the hearts of men? The potential victimizers, the traffickers, those are the men we're trying to reach and affect change in. The reality is you and I can do those kinds of things. We can be a part of those kinds of initiatives right here in the Cincinnati area. And your church is already actively involved in things like that. So when you step into those places and spaces and address vulnerabilities like that, you are addressing and combating trafficking before it can ever take root. The second thing I would encourage you with is this. Your generosity is fueling life change here and around the world. Aaron talked about this just a little bit ago, and I just want to emphasize this. I'm not asking you for anything. I hope today is a good example of what your generosity is doing. You are fueling life change. And if you have ever wondered if your giving at a church is making a difference, I want to emphasize to you, yes. Yes. Because stories like this are possible because people like you are giving. And from our vantage point, you all are mobilizing rescue, you are catalyzing healing, you are empowering survivors, and you are propelling transformation. Your giving is ensuring that frontline ministry is happening. You guys are helping to employ nearly 400 frontline workers in the fight against sex trafficking. You're making it possible to employ people who God is working through, who are bringing the tangible love of Christ into the lives and hearts of those who are affected by sex trafficking. And a bonus idea for you. Don't worry, this isn't on the slides. They may try to track this down. This isn't there. We can confront demand. We can have the awkward, uncomfortable conversations around pornography. I'm not going to deep dive into this conversation or not, maybe a conversation for another time, but this is one of those places and spaces that we need to have some difficult, maybe uncomfortable at times conversations around a topic like this, because sometimes people feel like this is an area, it's fine, it's culturally normal, it's become acceptable. But I'll tell you this much, it has direct ties to sex trafficking. It is fueling the demand side. And it is time that we have honest dialogue about it. Call it out for what it is and begin to bring healing and hope in the midst of the dark addiction that it becomes. Beginning to free hearts and lives from it so we can continue to free hearts and lives out of trafficking. So today, my encouragement for you is this. As you guys walk out of here today, my hope isn't that you're swirling on the statistics that I've shared and that you're disturbed by that. My hope is this, is that you can walk out and live with the faith of Joshua and Caleb, with a clear memory and perspective of the things that God is up to in our world right now. These aren't all just things of the deep past. These are things that I shared with you that have happened this calendar year in 2024. This year, these are the things that God is up to. And if we had more time, I would tell you the things that we see are already beginning to see God orchestrate as we look ahead. My encouragement to you as the church is that the God of miracles is still doing the miraculous. And our remembrance of the past informs our hope for the future. That's for you guys. That's for the church. So may it spur you on to a posture of availability and reliance. Because God will do far more than you could ever ask for or imagine. That's been our story. And I pray it becomes your story. Our vision at AIM is this. I shared our mission earlier. This is our vision. The agape love of Jesus Christ expressed to his followers, the church, you, me. Unlocking hearts one life at a time, community by community, generation after generation, joining God's global movement to rescue, heal, and transform those impacted by sex trafficking. I told you this when we started, and I believe it wholeheartedly. Victory is possible. Victory is possible, but it's going to take all of us. All of us. God's plan A is the local church. That's us. We get the opportunity to play a part in what God is orchestrating in our world, that the light that he is unleashing into our world, we get to play a part. We get to be on the front lines of that. And so my confidence that victory is possible comes from perspective of things that have happened in the past, of the light that he has already begun to bring, of the many buildings in Cambodia that were once being used for darkness that have now been redeemed to be used for light. A great example of this was, and maybe I shared this last time, I can't remember, but a great example of this was one of the very first buildings that AIM got a hold of was being built to be a hotel for pedophiles. large building in the community of Swipak. A businessman saw an opportunity because he knew what Swipak was known for, and so he started to build this large building that would house evil things. When he got word that AIM was in the community beginning to do work, he halted construction. While it was still under construction, we were able to obtain the building. And this building, the only thing that has ever existed in it is AIM. God stopped it before it could ever take root and allowed us to begin to establish ministry. To this day, it is the home of the church. It was the birthplace of the school. It houses many ministry and programs. Now, it is a beacon in the community and has been for years. There's a number of our other buildings that we got in the early days that had been brothels. God began to slowly transform the street front into ministry centers where he was sharing the gospel and transforming lives. Victory is possible. I've seen it firsthand. Even in the midst of the darkness of our world, the light of our God is shining brightly. I hope today that maybe we've pointed your eyes in the direction that you may be able to see it and be encouraged and hold your head high in confidence that our God is still at work. He has not forgotten about us. He is not gone. I hope our time today has encouraged you, that it has stretched you, that it has challenged you, that it has even empowered you with a vision and a hope for the future because of what God has done in our past. I want to read a verse as we conclude. It says this: "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." The reminder that Joshua was given as he took over from Moses and he was going to lead the people into the promised land. God called to him to be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. The reminder of what Joshua already knew, because it was the very thing that was driving Joshua to go into the promised land in the first place. And here was God reiterating to him again, remember, I'm with you. I'm going with you. I've gone before you. Just follow me. That's my hope and my prayer, that you would remember what God has done, that you would be confident that he will do it again, like Joshua and Caleb, and that you will step forward with a posture of availability and reliance. Our God's on the move. And I am so excited to see what he is up to and where he will lead us next and the next doors that he will open up. I am so grateful for churches like Summit that are helping resource ministry on the front lines. I would love to stand here for a lot longer and begin to tell you more stories on more stories and more stories about how people like you are fueling life change around the world. Getting to stand on the ground in those places and see what God is doing, what he is orchestrating, and the movements that he is beginning to start, the people that he is beginning to bring into place. And it's because the church is moving, and it is active, and it is alive. And you guys are a part of that. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the opportunity just to get a firsthand look at what you're doing in our world, that you are fueling life change, that you are changing communities, that you are, God, that you're just loving us and changing our lives, that you've redeemed us, you've shaped us, you've given us a hope for a future. God, I pray that we would begin to just move with the confidence, with humility, with patience. God, just move us. Encourage us, empower us. Give us your vision, give us your hope. Remind us that you're not absent. Give us eyes to see where you're at right here at home, in our area. Mobilize us, introduce us to people that would invite us into your movements and your opportunities. God, we're grateful for the opportunity to see what you're doing and to be a part of it. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.